Sometimes when I say to people, I like the Beatles, they say, I've always preferred the Stones myself, which I think, I just always find that quite an odd non sequitur. But because I have never really understood the idea that they are compared. I sort of understand why, in that they were both the sort of main totemic bands of the 60s, and both like very significant in terms of their music and culturally as well. But the fact that they are completely and utterly different prospects. I'm not talking about whether one was better than the other. I'm talking about the fact that they are just entirely different. I think the Rolling Stones are great. I think they've done sort of 5 or 6 albums that are absolutely brilliant. But essentially what the Stones are is an absolutely brilliant rock, blues-based rock band. And that's it, right? So, I'm not trying to be anti-Stones by saying that. I'm not saying, they're sort of limited. I'm saying what they do, they are absolutely the best ever at doing. But the Beatles are such a completely different prospect to that.
Yeah.
Just in terms of the different influences, the different musical styles. The Stones kind of like had their psychedelic period with their Satanic Majesty's Request, which actually I really love. But they kind of never developed that much. You kind of get the impression they did the psychedelia thing because everyone else was, but their heart wasn't in it really, and so then they got back to rock and roll as quickly as they could and then stuck with that.
That's interesting. You're right. I've always been a little bit fascinated by the idea that you had to be in a particular camp because you're right. Like, I do understand it, and this was at a time where, like, I guess pop culture itself was kind of verging into a new period, and it made sense that there were these two totemic bands that were leading the way.
Yeah.
I'm struggling to think of another example anywhere else where you get a similar response. Like, you couldn't be able to say to somebody, I really like Shawshank Redemption, and someone says, oh really? Because I've always been a Forrest Gump fan myself, like that doesn't happen. Maybe Star Wars, Star Trek, maybe, like, the idea of there being like these rival things. But I think I grew up aware of this divide between the bands, and as a result, assuming that the two were like deadly sworn rivals. So even now, I'm always quite interested to see footage of them getting along as friends.
Yeah,
I know there was obviously a degree of competition, like there was for all bands. Like, it's similar to the Beach Boys in that way. I said, in a sense. But yeah, it kind of goes against everything that I believed for such a long time. I just felt like they were always, trying to outdo each other.
Yeah, and actually, I feel like the age that you and I are, we grew up around the sort of Britpop era. We were teenagers around that era, and because of the Blur versus Oasis thing,
that's true.
You were kind of, the press kind of fed you this, and the Beatles Stones thing was kind of cited as the template for that quite a lot. This is because obviously Britpop harked back to the 60s so much, so it's like quite a convenient bit of journalistic narrative to kind of hark back to that. And you're right, I had the exact same impression that they were rivals in terms of not getting on in the same way that Blur and Oasis were.